The courthouse emptied slowly as golden light spilled through the tall windows. Papers rustled, heels clicked against marble floors, and distant voices echoed faintly through the halls. Judge Malia Reeves sat behind her desk in her chambers, removing her reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. The day had been long, emotionally, intellectually, and physically draining, but it had ended with a fair ruling, and that was what mattered. She closed the thick case file in front of her and reached for the small framed photo of her late husband that always sat to the right of her desk. Her fingers touched the edge gently. He'd been gone for 5 years, but in the silence of her office, his memory still felt present. Malia had built her life on quiet strength. Not spectacle, not volume, but consistency. 40 years in the justice system had taught her that true power didn't need to shout. She slid the photo back, rose from her chair, and slipped on her tailored gray blazer. As she stepped out of chambers, the corridors behind her seemed to exhale. Outside, downtown Huntington pulsed with life. Friday evening meant congestion, bumper-to-bumper traffic, flashing neon signs, the distant wail of a siren merging with the thump of bass-heavy music from passing cars. Malia descended the courthouse steps and crossed the street toward the private parking structure where her black 2023 Mercedes S-Class waited. The vehicle gleamed under the setting sun, its polished surface reflecting the chaos of the street in sleek fragments. She opened the door, sat inside, and paused a moment, both hands on the steering wheel. A breath in, a breath out. Her spine straightened. She eased into traffic, merging smoothly into the right lane. The car moved like silk through the roughness of the city. Its tinted windows and quiet engine drew glances from pedestrians and drivers alike. Some curious, some skeptical. One young man in a basketball jersey leaned into his friend and muttered, "Damn, she must be someone's sugar mama or something." At a crosswalk, an older white couple waited for the light. The man narrowed his eyes and leaned toward his wife. "That car's probably stolen," he said loud enough for Malia to hear through the glass. Malia didn't flinch. She never did anymore. But even after decades of ignoring these small, biting comments, the ones wrapped in coded language and smug glances, they still left a faint weight behind. They settled like dust on dignity, easy to brush off but always present. She turned down Main Street, where the shadows grew longer and the sun dipped low behind a cluster of steel and glass buildings. Her thoughts drifted briefly. To the docket for next week, to a letter she needed to finish, to the sound of her grandson's laughter the last time he visited. And then the flashing lights. Red and blue erupted in her rearview mirror, sudden, spinning, aggressive. A burst of siren, short and sharp, pierced the air before cutting off. The surrounding cars began to part like slow, unsure waves. Malia kept calm, signaling right and pulling to a stop along the curb. She shifted the car into park and folded her hands in her lap. The patrol vehicle behind her was a white Ford Crown Victoria, older, boxier, and far less dignified than the cruiser should have been. The front bumper was scratched and one headlight was slightly misaligned. The driver's door flung open with a mechanical groan, and out stepped the officer. White, early to mid-30s, built like a linebacker. His short blonde hair sat beneath a patrol cap slightly askew. His face was flushed, not from sun, but from something tighter and hotter beneath the skin. His utility belt jingled slightly with each step. Gun, baton, zip ties, radio. He adjusted it as he walked, like a man getting ready for a confrontation he intended to win. He approached the driver's side window. 2 sharp raps against the glass, not a knock, but a warning. "Hey, hey," he called out, his voice pitched to Carrie. "Slow down there, black lady. Where are you rushing off to in a car like this?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed up like curiosity. Malia didn't react. She rolled down the window halfway and met his gaze calmly. Behind the tinted glass, her expression remained unreadable. A woman pushing a stroller slowed on the sidewalk. A delivery cyclist paused nearby. No one stepped in. They never did. They just watched. Some with curiosity, some with fear, some with quiet anticipation, like people on the verge of witnessing a scene they had seen too many times before. "Is there a reason I'm being pulled over, officer?" Malia asked, her voice calm, low, and controlled. He leaned on the frame of the window, a smug grin on his face. "You're driving a $100,000 car like you stole it, and you're real calm about it. That's what's got my attention." "I wasn't speeding, I wasn't swerving," Malia replied. "You're welcome to check the traffic cameras at the last 2 lights." The officer's grin twitched. "Car papers, driver's license, and maybe a good reason you're out here looking like Wall Street threw you out the window." She didn't react to the insult. Slowly, she reached into her bag and retrieved her wallet. "I live 10 blocks from here. I'm returning home from work." "Oh, you've got jokes," he said, stepping back and folding his arms. "Cute." The sun dipped lower behind a building. A harsh amber light sliced across the windshield like a blade. Malia handed over her license and registration. He took them without looking, already having made up his mind about her. This wasn't about law. This was about something else. Control, presence, power. And Malia had seen it all before. But something in the air told her this encounter would go further than the rest. He let the moment stretch. Standing tall, still clutching her ID, he read her name slowly under his breath, lips barely moving. A flicker of a frown ghosted across his mouth. Then he slipped her license into his breast pocket. "You know," he said, tone dropping, more deliberate now, "I've seen plenty try to act cool. Dressed up, soft voices, big attitude. Doesn't fool me, just makes me more suspicious." Malia turned her head to face him fully. Her voice never rose. "Officer, if I violated a traffic law, I expect a citation. If not, I'd like to return home." He laughed. It wasn't joyful, it was mocking. "Oh, you want to go by the book?" he said, stepping closer. His voice dropped again, quiet and cruel. "Then here's what I'll do. You give me $5,000 in cash right now, and I drive away. No ticket, no towed car, no report. We both go home." The words hit the air like poison. Malia stared at him, her fingers curled slightly on the wheel, not shaken, just held with control. "What you're doing is illegal, officer," she said softly. "You're not enforcing the law. You're trying to sell your silence." His face twitched. "You calling me a criminal?" "I'm telling you to reconsider before you make a mistake you won't be able to fix." They locked eyes. Tension cracked like ice between them, but Malia didn't blink. Suddenly, the officer took a step away from the window. His hand went to his hip. He pulled his metal baton free and walked slowly around the front of the Mercedes. Someone on the sidewalk gasped. Another raised a phone. Malia's breath stayed steady. Her heart pounded louder, but her control never slipped. The baton swung high and smashed down against the left headlight. Glass exploded into fragments. The sound was sharp, final. "That's what happens when you think you're above the rules," he muttered, his breath ragged. A stunned silence settled. No one stepped in. Malia closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, something had changed. The calm on her face had solidified, not into fear, not into fury, but into steel. She turned her head, looked the officer square in the face, and said with quiet authority, "You've just added vandalism to your list of crimes." He barked, "What did you say?" "You heard me," she replied. This time, the bystanders weren't just watching for entertainment. Something deeper had shifted. They didn't know who she was, but they could tell this woman wasn't going to be broken easily. And deep in her chest, beneath the silence and the shattered glass, Malia Reeves made a decision. It was time to make a call. The silence after the shattering of the headlight was heavier than the sound that had come before it. Glass sparkled across the pavement like tiny, violent diamonds. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The city hummed and crawled around them, but in that one block of Main Street, time itself seemed to hesitate. Officer David Knox stood with the metal baton still in his hand, chest heaving slightly like he'd just claimed territory. His eyes were locked on Malia, waiting, no, daring her to react with emotion, with defiance, with something he could twist into justification. But she gave him none of it. Malia Reeves sat behind the wheel, her body still, her face unreadable. Only her eyes moved, slowly scanning from the shattered glass on the hood to the baton, then back to Knox's face. "You've just committed vandalism in broad daylight," she said quietly, her tone colder than before. He stepped toward the window again, fist twitching. "What was that?" Malia didn't flinch. "You heard me. You think this is a courtroom? You think that suit gives you power out here?" His voice cracked just slightly at the edge. "Out here, I make the rules. I decide who gets written up and who gets their car towed." Malia turned her head slowly. "Is that how you protect this city? By using your badge to intimidate and extort?" For a second, something in Knox's expression faltered. His posture held, but his eyes flickered, like a man realizing he'd stepped into something bigger than he thought, but refusing to back down. That fragile moment passed quickly. He straightened again. "You're just another slick-talking nobody with a big car and a big mouth," he hissed, "and you're about to find out what happens when you cross the wrong cop." He moved closer to her door, leaning down again. "You're resisting a police officer now," he muttered, "obstructing an investigation. And if you say one more word like that, I'll make sure you spend a night in county." Malia didn't move. She didn't argue. She simply looked him in the eyes and said, with quiet certainty, "You're going to regret this." There was no rage in her tone, no fire, just cold, unwavering truth. That made Knox pause. His breath caught for half a second, then he laughed, but it was nervous now, ragged. "You threatening me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her blazer pocket, slowly and deliberately, the way only someone with complete control of their fear can move. Knox's hand shot to his holster immediately. "Relax," Malia said, her voice calm as ever. "I'm not reaching for anything dangerous." She pulled out a sleek black phone, brushed a shard of glass from her lap, and unlocked it. Her thumb moved across the screen with purpose, as if she had done this exact thing before under worse pressure. Knox watched her, frowning. "You calling your lawyer now? Your rich cousin?" Malia said nothing. She scrolled through her contacts, tapped a name, and raised the phone to her ear. The line rang once, twice, then someone answered. "Frank," she said evenly, her voice not loud, not angry, but cutting through the air like a blade. "It's Malia Reeves." Knox blinked. His body stiffened, confusion creeping onto his face. "Yeah," she continued, eyes still looking forward. "No injuries. But one of your officers, David Knox, just pulled me over, said I was speeding, then demanded $5,000. When I refused, He destroyed my property. Yes, I'm still at the scene." There was a silence on the other end, but Knox could hear just enough, a raised voice, urgent, alarmed. "Who the hell are you talking to?" he barked. Malia didn't even turn her head. "Your police chief, Frank Delaney." Knox stepped back half a pace, then let out a dry, forced laugh. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect anything from you," she replied, lowering the phone, "but you're about to find out exactly who you've been threatening." Knox's face drained of color. On the other end of the line, Delaney's voice came through again, clearer now. "Malia, where are you exactly? I'm coming there myself." Malia ended the call. She set the phone down calmly on the passenger seat, then finally looked at Knox, not with contempt, not with fear, but with clarity. "I am Judge Malia Reeves," she said slowly. "Federal District Court, Northern District of Illinois." He stared at her. For a long moment, he didn't say a word. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His eyes dropped to the license still tucked into his vest pocket, then back to her face. It couldn't be. A judge? Driving alone? No escort? No flashing badge? Just this? "Judge," he repeated, the word stumbling out of his mouth like he didn't know how to use it. "Yes," she replied. "And now that you know that, you should have said something," he stammered, stepping further back from the window. "If I were someone else, just a woman in a suit, driving home from work, would you have acted differently?" Knox opened his mouth again. Nothing came out. A teenager on the sidewalk whispered to his mother, "Why's the cop backing off now?" His mother didn't answer. Malia exhaled, a slow breath that carried more weight than any raised voice could. Inside, her chest was coiled, not with fear, but with something colder. The familiar taste of knowing that dignity wasn't armor, that titles, experience, and intelligence still meant nothing in the eyes of someone drunk on authority. But now there would be consequences. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply folded her hands on the steering wheel and waited. Somewhere nearby, a boy quietly filmed the scene on his phone. An older woman pulled her toddler closer. No one said a word. But the mood had shifted. Justice, in that moment, wasn't being shouted. It was being held. Steady, like the silence before a wave hits. And the wave was coming. It didn't take long. The screech of tires signaled something different than chaos this time. It was precision, urgency, authority. A black, unmarked SUV came to a halt just behind the damaged Mercedes, its engine still rumbling as the door swung open before it fully stopped. Chief Frank Delaney stepped out without ceremony. Tall, broad-shouldered, in his late 50s, with silver dust in his temples and exhaustion in his eyes, Delaney wore no uniform. He didn't need one. The badge wasn't what gave him weight in a crowd. It was his name, his presence, his reputation for knowing every brick of Huntington like his own breath. His eyes scanned the scene in a single sweep. The crowd hushed now, the shattered headlight. Officer Knox frozen beside his patrol car. And then, her, Malia Reeves. She stood outside her vehicle now, composed as ever, arms folded in front of her, not in defiance but in stillness. The remains of glass glinted beside her heels. Sunlight had vanished, replaced by the flickering blush of street lamps above. Delaney's face hardened. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. His voice didn't rise much. It didn't have to. It cut like cold steel across pavement. Knox opened his mouth. "Sir, Not you," Delaney snapped, not looking at him. "Malia, were you hurt?" She shook her head once. "No, just the headlight." Delaney's jaw tightened. He turned to look at the broken remains of the Mercedes' left headlamp, then back to the officer. "David Knox," he said, slow and deliberate, as he walked forward. "Do you have any idea who you just pulled over?" Knox, pale now, swallowed. "Sir, I didn't recognize her. I didn't know." Delaney didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was low, a growl from beneath decades of discipline. "You didn't know?" he repeated, each word striking harder. "And that justifies what? Smashing a citizen's property? Demanding $5,000 in broad daylight?" The crowd shifted behind them. Someone coughed. Someone else clicked their phone camera again. "She looked suspicious," Knox blurted. "The car, the attitude, the way she was dressed. Delaney's hand came up in a gesture so sharp that Knox stopped mid-sentence. "You thought she was just another black woman in a car you couldn't afford," he said coldly. "That's what this is, isn't it?" Knox stood mute, sweat clinging to his hairline. "You humiliated a federal judge," Delaney said, "and you've disgraced this department." Malia said nothing. She didn't need to. Everything that needed saying was already thick in the air, already spoken through silence, through shattered glass, through the quiet folding of her arms. Delaney took a step back, inhaled once, and exhaled with finality. "You're done." Knox blinked. "Sir, turn over your weapon," Delaney ordered. "Your badge and your radio. Now." Knox stood motionless, as though his limbs no longer belonged to him. Delaney didn't flinch. He simply extended his hand, open, waiting. Slowly, Knox reached to his hip and unfastened his holster. He placed his firearm in Delaney's palm, then his badge, then the radio. Each item landed with a thud, not heavy in weight, but in meaning. Across the street, a man murmured, "Is this for real?" Another whispered, "That cop just got fired right in the middle of the street." The tension didn't rise. It settled, heavy, real, like the first drop of rain before a long overdue storm. Delaney stepped back, clipped his own radio off his belt, and pressed the side button. "Dispatch, this is Chief Delaney. Send Internal Affairs and a transport unit to Main and Elm. Officer Knox is being relieved of duty and will be taken in for immediate questioning." There was a beat of static. "Copy that, Chief. ETA 5 minutes." Knox's shoulders dropped slightly, not in relief, but in defeat. He didn't protest. There was no point. Delaney turned again to Malia. His voice softened, not from pity, but from respect. "Malia, I don't know what to say. I'm ashamed that he did this. Ashamed you had to go through it." She looked him straight in the eyes. "It's not about shame, Frank. It's about what you do next." He nodded slowly. "He'll face consequences. I swear to you, and I promise you, this won't be swept away. Not like the others." She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply said, "Good." The marked patrol car arrived moments later. The two officers who stepped out didn't meet anyone's eyes. Their posture was rigid. One of them hesitated as he approached Knox. "Officer," he said quietly, "do you need to sit down?" Knox didn't respond. He walked to the back seat and climbed in without a word. The door shut behind him with a soft, metallic click. No handcuffs, not yet, but the sound rang louder than any slamming cell. Moments later, two men in suits from Internal Affairs stepped from a black sedan. They moved quickly, but without panic. One looked at Delaney. "Full interview tonight?" "Yes," Delaney said. "Get me a full report on my desk before noon." Then he looked again at the Mercedes, the broken headlight, the glimmering glass like a wound on steel. "We'll cover everything. The damage, repairs, whatever you need." Malia's voice was calm but unwavering. It's not the money I care about, Frank. It's the culture. The fact that he did it because he thought no one would stop him." Delaney didn't argue. He just nodded. "He will be stopped," he said simply. They stood together in the growing night. The tension that once swelled between them was now replaced by something else. Not peace, not resolution, but understanding. Malia looked again at the crowd. People weren't just filming anymore. They were watching, really watching. "You know what this is?" she said, quietly enough only for Frank to hear. "It's not just a broken headlight. It's the moment the illusion cracked. That this doesn't still happen. That we've moved past it." Delaney clenched his jaw. "Then I'll make sure that crack spreads, in the right direction." She said nothing more. She turned back toward her car, stepped around the fragments on the pavement, and paused. She didn't reach for the door. Instead, she looked up at the cold glow of the street lamp overhead. There, in the reflection of her cracked headlight, she saw herself. Not broken, not angry, just standing. The glass would be replaced, but the lesson would remain. 3 weeks had passed. The air outside the Huntington Federal Courthouse was thick with anticipation. Reporters stood in tight clusters on the sidewalk, their cameras perched on tripods, microphones already wired. Behind them, a growing crowd of residents, activists, law students, and off-duty officers gathered silently, drawn not by spectacle but by something heavier, the weight of what this day represented. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs, punctuated by the occasional shuffle of papers and the gentle creak of polished benches. The space was packed, but not loud. No chants, no signs. Just presence. The presence of a city watching itself. At the front of the room stood a table. Behind it, former Officer David Knox. He looked thinner than before, his once straight posture now subtly hunched. The crisp uniform was gone, replaced by a pale gray suit that hung awkwardly on his frame. His hands stayed on the table in front of him, unmoving. His face was drained of color, eyes darting occasionally toward the gallery, then downward again, as if the weight of eyes on him was harder to bear than the charges. Beside him, his attorney, young, stiff, uncomfortable, whispered something. Knox didn't reply. Malia Reeves sat in the front row just beyond the railing, not as a judge today, and not as a victim demanding retribution. She sat as a citizen, one who had endured something that many had before her and many would again. But this time there were consequences. The presiding judge, her colleague, entered the room, and the bailiff called for silence. Everyone stood. Malia rose with them, her back straight, her gaze calm. She didn't blink when Knox was called to the stand. She didn't shift in her seat when the prosecutor read aloud the charges: attempted extortion, abuse of power, destruction of property, and misconduct under color of law. The testimony was swift. No theatrics. Just facts. The crowd didn't murmur when the boy's phone video was played, the footage of the officer smashing the Mercedes headlight while muttering about rules. The audio wasn't perfect, but the act was clear, the intent impossible to miss. There were no interruptions, no objections, just a slow, thorough unfolding of everything that had happened. The judge listened. The jury watched. Knox remained mostly silent. And then, the sentence. David Knox, for your actions on the evening of April 12th, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, the maximum allowed under these charges, and orders full restitution in the amount of $65,000 for damages, physical and emotional, caused to the victim, Judge Malia Reeves. No applause, no gasps, just silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence born of fear or shock. It was something fuller, deeper, like a collective breath being held and finally exhaled. Malia didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, as if honoring the space between injustice and resolution. When she stepped out of the courthouse afterward, the clouds had rolled in, casting a gray veil over the streets. The wind was gentle but insistent. Cameras turned toward her instantly. A few reporters called out questions, but she didn't stop. Not for sound bites, not for the headlines. Instead, she walked down the steps and stood at the edge of the sidewalk, looking out at the city. Her city, that had seen what it didn't want to believe still happened. That had watched a badge become a weapon and seen what it looked like when someone refused to give in. She remembered the night after it happened. She hadn't slept, not from fear, but from a kind of spiritual bruising. Her body had been still, her mind racing, replaying the sound, not just the glass shattering, but the reason behind it. The casual cruelty and the swing of that baton, the way a man in uniform believed, even for a second, that her dignity was disposable. And she remembered sitting in that car, feeling all the eyes watching her, waiting for her to yell, to fight back, and choosing not to. That choice, deliberate, measured, painful, had shaped everything since. Later that afternoon, Chief Frank Delaney met her on the steps of the police department. His coat was buttoned, his hair damp from the drizzle. "You okay?" he asked gently. Malia nodded. "Better than I thought I'd be." He hesitated. "You know, people are saying this case changed the department. Some officers, they're thinking twice now, about what it means to wear that badge, about the line between power and service. Doesn't fix everything, but maybe it's a start." Malia looked out at the street where a traffic cop now guided pedestrians across a busy intersection. A small child held his mother's hand as they crossed safely. A bus driver waved at someone waiting in the rain. "Starts don't matter," she said softly, "if they aren't followed through." Delaney offered the smallest smile. "That's why we need people like you, watching, holding the line, even when it gets ugly." She turned to him. Her eyes were calm but serious. "You know what I keep thinking, Frank? If I hadn't been a judge, if I didn't know you personally, that man would still be on duty, still out there, still threatening people who couldn't defend themselves." He didn't answer right away. The truth settled between them like wet concrete. "You're right," he finally said, "and that's the part I can't stop thinking about." Malia didn't press him. She didn't need to. She just looked at him, not with judgment, but with clarity. "That's the part we have to change," she said. Later that evening, a plain white envelope arrived at her home. Inside, a court-issued check for $50,000, compensation for emotional damages. She didn't frame it. She didn't cash it. The next morning, she walked into a modest brick building on the south side of town, a small nonprofit office, legal aid and trauma counseling for victims of police abuse. She stepped up to the front desk, introduced herself softly, and placed the envelope on the counter. "Use it for those who can't call the chief," she said, "for those who never make it to court." The woman at the desk looked stunned, then her eyes filled with tears. "Judge Reeves?" Malia smiled gently. Just Malia today. She turned and left without fanfare. Outside, the clouds had lifted slightly. The street lights flickered on, casting quiet white light across the sidewalk. She looked up once more at the sky, then at the rows of windows glowing from the buildings above. Dignity, she knew, was never loud. It didn't announce itself. It just remained, even when others tried to break it. The day was quiet, but it wasn't over. Back in her home, Malia Reeves sat at her dining table with a mug of untouched tea in front of her. The house around her was orderly and calm as always. Every frame on the wall hung straight. Every book on the shelf sat in its place. But there was something different in the stillness now. Not tension, not unrest, but reflection. The kind that comes only after a line has been drawn and justice has finally stepped forward instead of back. She stood up slowly and walked to the living room window. Outside, the city moved beneath a soft drizzle. Street lamps cast quiet halos on the wet pavement. Her Mercedes, recently repaired, sat in the driveway. The new headlight gleamed under the muted light, clear, precise. Yet, no matter how pristine the replacement, it would always remind her of the moment it had been shattered. Not by accident, not by force, but by the belief that some people can be broken without consequence. She turned as the doorbell rang. A delivery courier stood at her doorstep, soaked from the rain, but smiling politely. Package for Malia Reeves. She took it with a nod, thanked him, and brought it inside. It was small, no return label, just her name. Inside the package, a letter, handwritten, careful penmanship, no signature, just a name at the end. Tanya Jameson. A girl, likely no older than 20. Judge Reeves, I watched what happened to you on the news. I saw the video and I read everything I could about the case. I just wanted to tell you something. I'm starting law school this fall. I always knew I wanted to help people, but I didn't know how. When I saw you stand there and say nothing while he tried to strip away your dignity, and you didn't flinch, it made me realize something. Real strength isn't in yelling louder. It's in not letting the noise change who you are. Thank you. Malia stared at the letter for a long time. She folded it once, neatly, and slid it into a drawer next to her father's old legal text, not to keep it as a trophy, but as a reminder. Later that week, she returned to the police department, not for a meeting, not for ceremony, but to speak briefly with Chief Delaney. She was shown into his office without waiting. He stood as she entered. You didn't have to come in, he said. I know, she answered, but I wanted to speak with you face to face. He nodded. How are you? Clear, she said, more than I expected to be. Delaney leaned back in his chair. We've had conversations we should have had years ago. I'm pushing for a full review of field training procedures, a civilian oversight committee, and I'm trying to get funding for body cams on every unit, not just traffic. She looked at him. That's a start. I know it's not enough, but it's more than talk now. Malia nodded once. Then she said something she hadn't planned on. There's one thing I haven't told anyone, she began. The night it happened, after I got home, I sat in the garage. I didn't move. I just looked at the broken headlight for nearly 20 minutes. Not because I was afraid. I wasn't. I've dealt with worse, in quieter rooms and more subtle ways. But that moment, it wasn't just glass, it was a message. That someone thought they could erase everything I was, with one swing of a baton. Delaney didn't interrupt. I sat there thinking, what if I had shouted? What if I had demanded he recognize me? Would anything have changed? Would it have made a difference for the people who didn't have a title to protect them? He replied carefully, I think it made a difference because you didn't. She exhaled. That's what I hope. Before she left, he added quietly, if you ever want to teach a training session, speak directly to the next class, I'd be honored to make that happen. She raised an eyebrow. You want me to speak to your recruits? I want them to understand the cost of arrogance and the value of restraint." She gave him a look that was not quite a smile, but warmer than anything she'd shown in weeks. "Then I'll consider it." Outside the station, she walked past a familiar face, the teenage boy who had filmed the incident. He was with his mother, both of them looking surprised to see her. "Judge Reeves?" the boy asked. She turned to him. "Yes." "I just wanted to say, I was scared when I saw that cop yelling at you, but you weren't. I didn't know someone could stay that calm." His mother placed a hand on his shoulder, quietly proud. Malia crouched just slightly to look him in the eyes. "It's okay to be scared," she told him, "but being scared and staying strong aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing." He nodded, his eyes wide. He didn't speak again. Later that evening, she returned to the nonprofit legal center she had quietly funded. This time, she didn't hand over a check. She walked into the community room where a group of young black women sat in folding chairs, waiting for a workshop to begin. Malia stood at the front and introduced herself. Not as Judge Reeves. Just Malia. She told them what had happened. Not the details from the news. The real story. How it felt. What she thought. How she chose to stand still. And what happened afterward. They listened. Every word. Not because she demanded it, but because they recognized it. That kind of strength. The kind that refuses to let the world tell you who you are. When she stepped outside afterward, the sky had cleared. The stars were faint, but there. A soft glow from her car's new headlights cast twin arcs across the parking lot. She walked up to the car, looked at her reflection in the glass, and this time she saw not the moment of destruction, but of endurance. Not the shattering, but the standing. She got in and started the engine. The city opened before her, and for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like something she had to survive. It felt like something she could guide, quietly, powerfully, as always.